Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, Stay Safe, Stay Open, which is sponsored and supported through Salford City Council and funded through the European Union Structural Investment Funds. My name's Ian Hutchings. I'm the Managing Director of Vita Safety. We've been commissioned through Salford City Council to undertake a range of COVID secure, COVID safety visits and support for businesses. And this is really aimed at small high street businesses as part of the Keeping the High Streets Open project. So I'd also like to introduce Mike Pye. So Mike's going to be helping me today just with facilitating the session and some of the questions that we've had in as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. Like I say, I'm Mike, and I'm just here working with Ian and Vita Safety from a marketing perspective, putting today's session together and helping facilitating some of the questions that a lot of businesses have been asking the team at Vita Safety about how to address various challenges when it comes to COVID and COVID safety as the rules have changed. So I'll hand back over to Ian and we can go into the introduction.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so I guess just to summarise it, this programme of work it started the back end of last year and actually running now through till the end of June, which is timed quite nicely, really, with the releasing of lockdown and the roadmap for the government in terms of how we hopefully start to get out of the COVID crisis that we've been in. And we've been supporting a wide range of high street businesses across all a range of neighbourhoods in Salford. These have included beauty, newsagents, retail, bars, restaurants, so the offices, the full range of businesses that you'd usually find on high streets. And this project and the support that's available is free because it's funded through the European Structural Investment Fund. And we've already completed, I think we're on target now, hopefully to complete up to 200 visits by the end of June. And we've already completed a number and delivered a few different webinars, which you can still access through the website and on YouTube. One was just a general webinar just to give you information, support and advice on reopening your business. And the other webinar that we delivered was specifically aimed at takeaways. So the webinar today, the session today, is really just aimed at hospitality businesses. So obviously those of you that work within restaurants and bars in the Salford areas.
Brilliant, thanks, Ian.
Okay, so what we try to do is, one of the things that we do offer businesses, we offer a visit. So part of the visits is we actually, and it's not a regulatory visit. It's actually a visit to help you as an organisation to keep yourselves safe, keep your team safe, and also keep your customers safe as we start to come out of the current lockdown situation. And the way we've organised the visits and the advice that we provide is really to try and get you to think about the journey that your customers will take through your premises. And if you're able to sort of try and visualize, hopefully this won't be the case, but if you consider that if there's a possibility that you do have somebody that is COVID positive entering your organization, what are the key steps that you need to take to control that risk and to prevent that, the virus from being spread to anyone else? So we've split this down into sort of 6 key points. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to run through those 6 key points, which are covered on this slide. It's worth noting, as we said, this is obviously being recorded, so this is available, so you don't need to really be taking notes or anything. Something we do find is when you enter a business or you turn up at a bar or a restaurant, first impressions are really important. So when your customers arrive at the entry point to the business, there's clear things like signage that are really important in terms of, COVID secure premises, how customers are managed in terms of those timings. So what we found really useful with this is obviously things like where you're able to not just limit people's time, for example, if they've got a few hours at a table, but also booking and managing the booking process. Obviously ensuring that people understand that face coverings are mandatory when they're walking around your premises. And there's also opportunities. And what we've done is we suggested sometimes, and depending on the type of business, the test and trace and being able to take people's details may either be done at the entry point, but I know some of the organisations and the bars and restaurants that we visit, you don't want loads of people congregating at the entrance. So sometimes it is easier to do that when people are sat down. It's worth noting that under the current guidance that, you know, face coverings aren't a legal requirement as such when people are outdoors. But having said that, as part of your organisation of the business, if you've got tables and people are seated, it is really important when people are not sat in their designated tables that they do wear face coverings, unless they're exempt when they're moving around the premises. So what a lot of businesses we see do is obviously when people are taken to the seating, it's a really good opportunity for a member of your team to reiterate what the rules are and what the process is in terms of, you know, how orders are going to be taken, where there might be rest facilities available, the requirement to wear face coverings when people move around, and things like hand sanitizer stations and where they're available. So I guess part of that briefing is it's really important that you obviously the training of your staff, but then feeling comfortable, but also confident, because, you know, unfortunately, you know, understanding the sector you work in, sometimes you will get people that might have concerns, or they might raise issues around some of these controls that we're trying to put in place. And there's an opportunity again as part of that briefing or that discussion, as people come into the premises and people are seated, to talk about test and trace, whether that's using the NHS app. I know not everybody's happy to do that. So the key thing is that can still be just somebody's contact details, their mobile number and the name. But it is now a requirement for everybody within the party. So I know previously, sometimes we just asked the person who was sort of the lead in the party to give their details. It's now a requirement for everybody, all members of the group, to provide their contact details. Unless they're under 16, that doesn't have to be provided then.
Ian, can I interrupt you there? So what's the legal responsibility from that perspective? Because I've been out this week going to various cafes and bars and restaurants and things, and how they're all addressing it is completely different. I've been to some where, like you've just explained, there's been loads of people queuing up, not really socially distancing, trying to get into somewhere. Some places where they are doing test and trace on the app and enforcing it that way and only that way, and in other places they're enabling you to write it down. Some places not taking it at all. What's the legal responsibility that they should be doing?
They should be taking everybody's individual details somehow. You don't have to use the test and trace app. I know, you know, that's a personal choice in a way. Some people are happy to do that. It's obviously easier quite often for the venue to people just scan in. But, you know, sometimes there's also a need to note down those individual contact details. So I guess that's the party line, and that's what the expectation would be. You know, if there is a visit from a regulator or an enforcement officer, would be that you've got contact details, and it's obviously down to the individual, to be honest, with what those are. But yeah, that's the key thing. But obviously, it becomes more challenging when you've got more people coming. You've got people potentially queuing outside the premises that can cause a bit of an issue.
Great.
Okay, so I mean, obviously ordering, obviously the preference. I think most places now, you know, you need to be able to take orders at the table. There are obviously other premises where that might be, you know, you've got other things that may have be opening up gradually, like, you know, coffee places and sandwich shops and things like that, where people might need to be able to queue up, but it's still important to manage those numbers and also that flow around the business, particularly if you've got outdoor spaces as well, and also informing customers about how they're going to receive their order. I think what's worth saying here is, you know, what you tend to see now when you're out and about is things are going to take longer. And I think most customers hopefully understand that, you know, because of all these things that have been put in place. You know, we hopefully understand that service might be affected by this, but sometimes I think there's an opportunity when deliver in this. I guess it's just good practice in hospitality, really, is when you take an order, just to give an idea. if there is going to be any delays or things are going to take a bit longer, really. But obviously those orders are going to be delivered straight to the tables. There are some challenges I think you see where people, are bringing things out on trays, and how they manage some of those things in some of those outdoor spaces and being able to deliver those in a, I guess, as a hygienic way as possible to the table. I think in terms of payment, most places now are going to be taking card payments or contactless payments where possible, and that's the preferred option. But you can still take cash if that's required. I think traffic, when we talk about traffic here, it's really about people's movement. So things like moving around the premises, visiting the washrooms, how do you manage that? Well, the numbers around those things, and just trying to avoid people starting to congregate around entrances and exits as well, and around those points, and throughout those areas, if people are visiting, restrooms and things, is being able to encourage hygiene, because whatever we've done, really, the main controls and the main ways of preventing the virus from spreading is still distance, and it's still personal hygiene as well. Yeah, so I guess some of it's back to basics, really, because we do. I think what we have seen is I think, because the situation that we've been in for, well, it's over a year effectively now, is that things have started to deteriorate a bit. People have obviously slackened off a bit with some of the basics, but I think where there's opportunities to keep using signage, your signage might need refreshing now. It might need some better signage. Things have obviously changed. There's also opportunities if you've got things like online booking or your website or your social media presence, to reinforce some of these things, that you can ensure people are still following those basic hygiene practices, really, and just reminding people. There's a few examples we've seen where businesses have actually now incorporated this onto some of their, things like high-vis vests or t-shirts or some of the business wear that some of the team are wearing. So I think it's in a way, some people are more likely to visit premises and come back to visit your business if these things are well managed. It's actually starting to put people off if they don't feel safe. So I think in a way, it's worth considering the financial benefit of doing this correctly as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that, definitely. There was places that I walked through Manchester last night, and it was absolute chaos, and you just think that they're not in control of that situation.
No. And some people obviously clearly aren't particularly concerned about that, but I think for others that will actually put customers off. So you're potentially losing revenue, and I do think certainly where you've got alcohol involved, obviously, as the day wears on and the evening wears on, there's going to be more challenges. You potentially can have more people wandering around, talking to people at different tables, and I can see the benefits on both sides for business not moving people on, but again, that puts other customers off potentially. So there is, I think, the table booking, where you're able to take bookings and where you're able to limit people's time, for example, if it's a couple of hours, in a way, that's a really good way of managing people that might be a bit inebriated as well, and a good way of managing some of those people out of your premises.
Right. Okay, so on to outdoor then, Ian. So obviously we're right into the peak of people being able to go out and enjoy hospitality outside. Definitely from personal perspective, seen that happening in a really safe way, but also seen it happening in a way where it seems like everybody's just kind of thought this is all over and it's back to normal. So how would you suggest that businesses deal with that situation from a reputational point of view and a safety point of view?
Yeah, I think it's in some ways it's a bit unfortunate that some businesses are fortunate enough to be able to use outdoor spaces, so they've either been able to get temporary changes to their payment licenses so they can put tables and chairs outside, or they do already have an outdoor space like a beer garden or the back of the bar or the back of the restaurant that they can use for outdoor service. I think, and you'll see lots of organisations, lots of businesses out and about have put in place temporary or even permanent sort of coverings and structures. Something that's really important, and I obviously understand timing for this. Some of these things might already be in place, but the actual rulings is really that still need to be considered to be outside. Is the actual structure needs to be not more than 50% open. Sorry, not more than 50% enclosed. So that's quite an important point, because you do see quite a lot of structures and things that have either been put up as a full-time structure or something that's temporary, that don't really have that open space in it. The way the law works is it's actually similar to smoking legislation effectively. So where you've got smoking shelters, they also have to be at least 50% open effectively, and that means a permanent part of the structure that's open. So what it doesn't allow for is things like, if you've got a marquee or something that's up there, people start to put the sides down. And I think we're only just a week ahead of this now in terms of things opening up again. We've been quite fortunate, apart from it being quite cold in the evening. The weather's been really good for the last week. I think, where we are now, that might change a bit. So this is where it's going to become more of a challenge for businesses, because there's a couple of things to consider. One is, obviously you've got things like the airflow. So if you start to restrict that, it increases the potential for the spread of the virus. You should still have social distancing. It mentions other households there. You can still have other households together, either 2 households together or a maximum of 6 people, but there should still be adequate space around the tables and around how that service is managed to give people that sort of safety. The structure side of things can be a bit complicated, because if you're putting in temporary structures, it's really, really important that we think about, obviously, the COVID safety in terms of how open that is, in terms of being over 50% open to the elements, but also how safe is that structure if you're going to get things like a change in the weather. And bearing in mind, some of these things can happen mid-service. So you might have a great afternoon, and then as the evening wears on, if the weather changes or the wind increases, most structures, you either need to look at the manufacturer's instructions that should give you some indication of what the maximum wind loading might be on the structure, or you might even need to seek the services of a structural engineer to give you some calculations. But those things are really important, because it wouldn't be the first time that some of these things have actually been shifted in the wind and because of the weather. So it's really important that you and your team understand what we're going to do. Things like floor conditions as well. You might have temporary spaces outside the back of a bar, or you might have them where you've got cobbled streets and various other areas, or just trip hazards and things that need to be considered. And also, a lot of organisations probably put in place risk assessments last year, but what you should be doing now is making sure that all these changes are actually referenced and updated in the risk assessments that you've completed, and also your sort of training for your staff. I've mentioned pavement licenses, so some of you may have pavement licenses already. You can apply. It's usually through the highways part of the local authority, so you can apply for those for temporary pavement license to be extended as well. And it's important that you understand that those things need to be just confirmed with the council as well. Okay, so I guess enforcement of rules, and again, this is probably rebriefing your staff. Staff may have been, I think, particularly in hospitality, obviously people were in and out of work last year. People have probably been furloughed. You're either bringing the same staff back, or you're bringing in new members of the team. So it's really important that your training records and your briefings still go through all these things that need to be considered. There's obviously challenges around things like, we need to have a conversation with customers about refusal of service in terms of alcohol, and those of you that are fortunate enough to have security may be able to deal with some of those points of entry. But where you are taking details for things like tracking the test and trace, there are a few different opportunities along the way to sort of establish what sort of condition of people are in when they're coming in. But I think last orders is a good example, certainly for bars, is just giving people plenty of notice. If you're going to stop serving at 11 o'clock, you need to be going around at, say, 10, or maybe a little bit before, and just saying, just by the way, this is when we close, this is when the last orders is. The danger with that, obviously, as we all know, is people sort of buying multiple drinks before the end of the day. So you might want to try and limit that as well, as much as you can. Just in terms of just a few reminders on here, obviously face covering, social distancing between other households, other groups, the hand sanitizers, people staying at the table wherever possible. You'll see this when you're out and about. Certainly in bars, it's quite obvious when people see other people that they know, or people just lingering around the tables. I think the thing that we found is the more proactive you are with talking to customers about this and just giving people nice, gentle reminders, people actually take that quite well. I think it becomes more difficult if you don't do it, because the more people sort of start to, move outside of those rules or do things differently, the longer you let that go on, the more difficult it's going to be to deal with later on.
It's really tricky for business owners, I think, because it's been such a tough 12 months, especially for the hospitality sector, to then feel like they might be upsetting customers by having to be strict with the rules. It's a real balance, I think, between being sensible and making sure that people are being safe and not wanting to turn people away. How would you suggest that they approach that kind of situation?
Well, I think people who, I've never ran a bar. I've worked with lots of hospitality businesses, but a lot of you that work in those sectors are just very good. I think it's part of your training as well, is how do you deal with people in those situations. So sometimes that can be, a gradual, almost like a gradual reduction in service to slow things down if people might be drinking a bit more, or just to maybe suggest that they might need to slow down a bit. But I think quite often some of the things I've seen is actually it's a balance, I guess, as you sort of say, Mike, between, because obviously that refusal sometimes can lead to aggression as well. So it's down to that training and understanding from your staff, and sometimes isolating people. If you've got a particularly rowdy couple of people or people you're concerned about, you can actually gradually start to sit people elsewhere if you can have to deal with a potential situation with that table or that group. But the crux of this is, as well as the COVID, safety management and how people behave in your premises, it potentially going to affect your license to operate. So unfortunately, it's something that really does need to be dealt with. Okay, so cleaning. This is something when we do the different premises visits that we've organised. We do look at things like, and you generally, if you've got facilities in place in your premises anyway for members of the public and customers to use, you're probably going to be on top of this anyway. I think all we'd say is you need to probably increase the frequency of some of those cleans. Making sure it's recorded as well is really important, because if there is any sort of, either investigation or regulatory action or checks on the premises, there is an expectation that you can evidence some of those cleaning rosters. So they're pretty much things that you're going to be doing anyway, things you would have been doing in the past. But also, as we said earlier, I think it's just managing the numbers of people that are hanging around facilities and toilets, and just trying to manage some of those numbers. We know it's not easy for everywhere, because there are smaller bars and restaurants that have got really limited facilities as well. It might be worth, just back on that one, was possibly flagging that up as well. People are booking, to say, just to let you know, or even when people come in, so they can maybe go to the facilities sooner rather than later if there's going to be a queue or there's only one or two options for them. Emergency procedures, something we've found over the last year is, because we've had this massive focus on COVID safety, is if we're not careful, we tend to forget about some of the peripheral issues. So I think a classic one is obviously first aid. There's some really good guidance out there for first aid from St John's Ambulance. So I'd really recommend looking at that, because it does go into, what are the CPR procedures and guidance now, because all these things do need to be considered. And where you've got first aiders in your team, they'll need a bit of either just extra briefing or awareness of what to do in these circumstances. You should have, in your premises, you should have a fire risk assessment. And because a lot of these things would represent an operational change or a change to how you manage the premises, that fire risk assessment should really be getting reviewed now. So that's something you do need to check, is that you've got a fire risk assessment, because that's a legal requirement for any premises, but also, has it been reviewed, has it been updated with some of these changes in operations within the premises or in the outdoor spaces that you're using. Some just key things, like if you've got fire hydrants or exits or any of these things now being blocked. I've seen a few places I've been where there's fire escape entrance exits, or there's extinguishers or other things that are either blocked by tables, and that might not be your premises, it might be the next door premises. Certainly in the centre of, in Salford and in the centre of Manchester, there's lots of examples where people have got businesses and bars and restaurants that are in quite close proximity. Things like fire marshals, do you need to increase the number of fire marshals? If people are going to have to leave the premises in the event of a fire or emergency, where are they going to go to? What are your muster points? Where are people going to get together? Something else I think I've not mentioned on here is also just thinking about fire access for emergency services. Particularly in some of the built-up areas where you've got tables and service at the back of buildings, particularly where they're old terrace type buildings or bars. How are we going to get emergency services into those? Are there fire hydrants on the street that people are going to need to access? And a key thing is fire doors. Unfortunately, we do see fire doors getting propped open, and we understand why people have done that, because obviously they're trying to stop, reduce the number of touch points, but fire doors are there for a reason. So they really need to be, as far as possible, either left shut, or they should have some sort of magnetic lock on them that closes them automatically when the fire alarm or the fire system activates.
Fantastic. Moving on to delivery, obviously it's still a massive part of the hospitality industry, and I think people have taken takeaways more than ever over the last 12 months. A lot of businesses have expanded into home deliveries. So tell us a little bit about the risks around that.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly personally expanded, I think, over the last year because of takeaways. But I think particularly now that restaurants and bars are open again, be it with sort of limited operations, you do get this issue now where you've got delivery drivers coming in and out of picking stuff up, picking up orders, and just you do need to make sure they're sort of segregated and away. And I think that there is probably a need for just a reminder and maybe a briefing for some of your drivers, some of your delivery staff, because you do see a bit of a deterioration in that, not just from customers, but also people delivering food and drinks that maybe the controls aren't what they were, a year ago. So it's certainly, I think all these points is worth having a look at and just thinking about, because it's an extension of your business. And I think people, if they do feel a bit unsafe, there's still people that aren't likely to go and visit bars and restaurants for some time because they still feel uncomfortable about it. So, you want these deliveries to sort of look and feel like it's still important and that risk is well managed.
Brilliant. So finally then, we've had a number of questions that a lot of the customers that you visited over those sort of last 200 visits have regularly posed to you. And I suppose there's a lot of questions in and around now hospitality is opening up again, that a lot of business owners have got when it comes to this that we can have a chat through now. So I'll go through some of these questions and maybe you can give your feedback. So face masks obviously still incredibly important, and there's not a legal requirement to wear a face mask. and there is, you know, a lot of people are maybe taking the opportunity to stop doing that because it's not very comfortable. What's your perspective on that if people do refuse outright?
We can't, as you said, rightly said, you can't make someone wear a face mask, and you can't really ask somebody if they say they're exempt why they're exempt. And that's clearly written into the legislation. I mean, all you can do, I think, is you can remind people when they're coming in, because people just forget sometimes as well when they're moving around. And I think, as things hopefully do feel a bit safer, people are likely to maybe not wear them. I think it's probably good practice just to have some disposable ones as well available that people might just genuinely forget that you can offer them one when they arrive as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I think most people have been accidentally guilty of, but in very few places actually do have face masks that you can quickly just borrow.
You could sell them. I don't know.
Yeah.
A bit more money.
Next question is around managing capacity within the business and table bookings themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you should ideally, as part of the fire risk assessment, part of your assessment for the premises, certainly when you've got the indoor spaces that would typically be used, you should actually have an understanding of capacity. So it's important I mean, the way to control that is literally counting people in and out, understanding the spacing of the tables, looking at the space available. There are calculations, but it tends to be more fire orientated rather than, I mean, if anything, now the situation that we're in, it should be easier to manage because you can only do table service. So it's not like you can have a load of people stood at the bar. It should actually make things easier. And there's businesses I know that actually, if things, hopefully as and when things change, they're actually going to continue with table service because they've actually found it an easier way to manage their bit, particularly in bars. Obviously, restaurants is a given, but for bars, it's actually proved quite beneficial for them because they've been able to have people just focus on preparing drinks, people covering different areas of their establishment. So that's, yeah, I think it's booking systems are the ideal for that if you can do that.
Yeah, and what's the kind of the defined process between bookings? So as one table leaves and then another table comes in, is there a set sort of routine of things that they should be doing to make sure that it's completely clean?
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're already doing, I would imagine, is just cleaning tables down and customers having to perhaps just be informed that they need to maybe wait for a few minutes. And I think as a customer, it's quite nice to see that, someone's left, there's a good clean down happens at the table and, provision of cutlery is managed and, things aren't left lying around. So, yeah, I think that's obviously going to happen between customers.
Yeah. I suppose one of the most important ones is what should they be doing if there is a case, because if they're using Test and Trace, the official app, or they're taking people's details, it can maybe be quite complicated to work out what are the next steps if that's reported.
I mean, it's pretty much as was really in terms of the advice. I mean, a lot of businesses will, as part of the booking system now, if it's obviously more so if it's a restaurant, but some bars will ask you those questions, based on the symptoms. In terms of your staff, I mean, you can actually now order lateral flow tests as well. I know I've looked at it for my business, and I ordered some last week. I think they came the next morning. So you can actually, you can't enforce that, but I think it may mention that later. It mentions it later on, actually, Mike. But you can encourage people that's a good thing to do, not just for themselves but their family as well. But I think, yeah, I mean, in terms of personal details, people don't have to use Test and Trace. I mean, that's up to you as a business. If you wanted to say you have to use it, you can do. What's done in your premises and your risk controls are based on what your preferences are. I mean, I think generally I would just ask for people's phone and contact details and the name. But if they refuse to provide those, my personal view would be that you shouldn't really allow them to access the premises.
Sure. We talked about weather a little while ago and how that impacts outdoor space, especially if it's enclosed. We've been really lucky this week when things have been opened up. It's been really beautiful weather, but what should businesses be considering with a view to a traditional English summer?
I think part of it is looking at the look at the weather forecast. I mean, it's not always accurate, as we all know, but it's going to give you a bit of an indication. And I'd certainly look at some of those structures outdoors, because they are, you might be surprised, and you can get winds. I mean, you can actually get wind speed indicators and things you can put up, for bigger organizations might do that, but you'll have an indication on weather apps and through the news as to what the levels of some of that wind loading might be as well. So I'd certainly consider that, and I think that might affect your capacities as well. So you might need to think about capacities for weather changes.
Great stuff. I suppose this is a very relevant question with regards to outside drinking and people, like you mentioned, bumping into people and kind of the natural opportunities for groups to grow. The group might start as 4 or 6, but then if there's groups of friends arriving and all of a sudden drink starts to flow and people start to becoming a bit more relaxed and joining tables and stuff like that, how do businesses kind of deal with that situation?
I think you've just got to be really proactive and just you've just got to knock it on the head when it's happening, because you do see it. You see people wandering around, you see people pulling up chairs, sitting next to other people. Unfortunately, our advice is you've really got to stick to the guidelines. So as I said earlier, I think the more proactive you are with these things, you set your stall out earlier, you see someone go and sit down and join another group, you do have to go and have a discussion with them. That's just how it is, unfortunately, because the more you let that happen, the more difficult it's going to be. And actually, it's not fair on your staff. No, because at the end of the day, they're going to be the people that are going to have to deal with these objections as well. So I think it just needs to be really, managed as quickly as possible.
Brilliant, thanks. So we've covered loads today. There's loads of resources that people can go and find. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about how they can access some of your support in a bit more detail and where they can maybe go to get a bit more guidance?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a plethora of guidance out there. We've provided some links here. There's a lot of really useful information provided from Salford City Council. So I'd really, advise you to have a look at their business guidance. The links are on there. We'll also put these with the webinar on our website. So that's the good thing about that advice as well, is that guidance is being updated, because we all know how difficult it is to keep up to date with the constant changes and where we're at in terms of the roadmap as it stands. We do still have some slots available for visits. So what we are able to do is visit high street businesses in Salford, and we can, as I said, these aren't regulatory visits. These are there to give you advice. You get a free report that we email to you. If you'd like to arrange that, please just get in touch. Our inquiries email address is on there, so it's just inquiries@vitasafety.com. And we'd be really happy to help you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ian. And all your contact details are here as well, in case anyone wants to get in touch personally.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Mike.
Ian. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.